Hi, this is Kirk, the bariatric carnivore. Let's talk about why I don't fear fat, why I eat meat, why I'm not afraid of my cholesterol level, and why do I not fear saturated fat? Why in the heck do I stay away from vegetable oils? Well, it all boils down to this, the Minnesota coronary experiment. And this is a great study and a great story, and it probably will tell you a little bit more about what's wrong with the medical system and how we report medicine than any other story I can tell you. This is what changed my mind and my whole viewpoint when it came to understanding the importance of fat and diet and why most of what we're taught is nonsense. Dr. Evan Fance is a professor of medical science at the University of Minnesota. He worked very closely with Ancel Keys, who controlled most of the federal funds when it came to studies at that particular time. And he had an idea for how to do a double-blind study that would finally prove the coronary heart hypothesis, the idea that dietary fat created heart disease. And he was going to create a double-blind study utilizing one nursing home and 6 mental institutions. He was going to divide the groups into 2 groups. Half the participants would get margarine, shortening, vegetable oils, low-fat milk. The other half would get a more standard American diet, regular meat, hamburger, regular fat, tallow, butter, whole milk. And he was going to compare the 2 groups, and they were hoping to show that the number of coronary heart diseases would go down dramatically when you shifted your diet to the way most Americans eat today. Lots of vegetable oil, skim milk, almond milk, whatever. But he was going to try to do that in a controlled environment. And Dr. Fance was a phenomenally gifted researcher. He controlled everything down to the slightest details. Back then, Minnesota had a law that said you could only, when you gave somebody margarine, it had to be cut into a triangular shape so people could tell the difference between real butter and margarine. And he got him to change the law so he could do his experiment. So, now when you go to a restaurant and you get those little squares, you have to look at the label real closely to determine if you have margarine or butter. It was Dr. Fance that got that law changed. This was an intense study that lasted from 1968 to 1973. Back then, you could do a dietary study with people that were being held in mental institutions and in nursing homes without really their consent. People, I don't think you can get this study approved today, but it was incredibly well controlled, double-blinded. People had no idea what in the world they were getting, if they were getting margarine or not, if they were getting a low-fat diet or not. They were tested regularly for their blood cholesterols. They were given EKGs. Their health was constantly checked for 5 years. And it was probably the best experiment that you could ever hope for that would look and see, wow, if you reduce somebody's dietary fat, does it protect them from heart attacks? The results were astounding. Okay, the age of participants ranged from 20 to 97. There was 2,355 participants over 5 years. And there was a 14% reduction in the overall total cholesterol levels of those that ate the low-fat diet. So it did succeed at lowering cholesterol. The downside was there's a 22% increase in all-cause mortality from the participants that ate the low-fat diet. In other words, eating the diet recommended to you by your government today increases your chance of dying early by 22%. That's the science. That's what this study says. Now, why didn't you hear about it? Why don't they talk about this study? Because the results were, interestingly enough, buried. Yeah, you funded this study with your tax dollars, but because this went against what Dr. Fance believed, he never published it. Dr. Keys, who was the head of that particular agency that controlled the funding, who created the dietary heart hypothesis, did not like the results. So they never fully published the results. What was interesting was, well, how come I know about it today? Well, in 2006, a researcher was looking into it, found indications that the study had happened, started poking around, and found out that Dr. Fance's son, Dr. Fance was a guy who never threw away anything. And he had stored the magnetic tapes and all the notes and research down in his basement, and his son found it. His son is a doctor who also buys into the idea of the dietary heart hypothesis. He's also a doctor. And he gave it to this investigator. And this guy went through it, recreated all the data, looked at it, and said, wow, this completely turns our whole idea of diet upside down. And he published it in the British Medical Journal. I mean, one of the top 3 most prestigious medical journals in the planet. And people have ignored it. I don't know why they've ignored it. The only reason why I heard about it is I've heard about that study on a podcast. Malcolm Gladwell did one. And it wasn't really an attack on our dietary dogma. He was just talking more about how fathers and sons and what do people owe each other. And did the son owe his father's, to protect his father's legacy by further continuing to bury the data? That's what the podcast was on. But when I heard it, that's what piqued my interest. I said, wait a second. I've been lied to. Everything that I've been told about diet, that if I lower my cholesterol, it's going to improve my life, protect me from heart attacks, is not true. We have a study that proves it. Matter of fact, we have a study that proves that it kills people at a faster rate than anything else. Why are we doing this? Why don't we keep, and these are the type of things that I find out in my own study of nutrition that have made me change my views. They created questions that made me start to question traditional medical dogma. I'll include a link to this study, the article in the BMJ, which is a phenomenal, probably one of the most interesting articles that you will ever read in a medical journal. And when you realize that it completely contradicts everything that you've been taught. When the keto diet, the carnivore diet are attacked by critics, people always say, well, there's no evidence that what you do will improve people's health. Frankly, you can't do that type of study anymore. When you really get into it, trying to create a situation where people only eat an all-meat diet for an entire lifetime and people who eat a plant-based diet and compare the 2 health results, that can't be done. You can do it for a couple of months maybe, but they're terribly expensive studies that nobody wants to finance because there's no money to be made for those type of studies. That's kind of the problem. We're not getting really good studies like this one. But the Minnesota coronary study and a follow-up study that was done earlier, called the Sydney Heart Study, showed very conclusively that lowering people's cholesterol, putting them on a low-fat diet, actually harms health. And the best one that's ever been done was the Minnesota coronary experiment, and it showed conclusively that if you want to die faster, eat the diet that our government recommends. Don't take my word for it. The science is a science. The report is a report, and it was done better than any other one probably in the history of the planet. And when I studied that and I saw it, that's when I quit fearing saturated fat. Because I figured I'm being worked over. There's a series of drugs called statins. They're cholesterol-lowering drugs. And the reason why, they are $1 trillion industry. Big Pharma has been selling us $1 trillion worth of statin drugs trying to lower our cholesterol. Why did they do that? Because they've been selling us the idea that lowering cholesterol protects you from heart attacks with no real evidence to support it, and completely contradicted by the Minnesota Coronary Heart Study. Now, it could just be that, by using vegetable oils and margarines and low-fat milk, that you're increasing the amount of linoleic acid in the system, and that may be the killer. or it could be just lowering cholesterol in general is a killer too. We're not 100% sure. We'll never be able to find out with certainty probably in our lifetime. But either one of those things is enough reason for me to say, look, cholesterol's fine. There's enough studies that show that people with the highest cholesterol levels live the longest. And that goes along with the Minnesota coronary experiment. And that's why I don't fear fat. Once you get over your fear of saturated fat, once you get over your fear of meat, then all of a sudden keto and carnivore become much more palatable as an idea. If you like this video, if you want to hear more like it, if you want to be part of our community, if you want to join other people that are trying to learn how to become healthier, that are trying to go past what is kind of traditional medical dogma and really look at the real science behind it, please hit a like, subscribe, join our tribe. I try to do a video every workday, and I hope you will join us. This is Kirk, Bariatric Carnivore. We'll see you tomorrow.